Hey there! Welcome to From Inside My Book Fort. Today I'm going to read a passage from Still Life, the first in the series of Louise Penny's Three Pines series. The ritual was simple and time-worn. Myrna led it, having grounded herself with a full lunch of casseroles and bread. Very important, she explained to Clara, to feel grounded before a ritual. Looking at her plate, Clara thought, there wasn't much chance she'd be flying away. Clara examined the 20 or so faces gathered in a cluster on the village green, many of them apprehensive. The farm women stood in a loose semicircle of woolen sweaters and mitts and toques, staring at this huge black woman in a bright green cape, the jolly green druid. Clara felt perfectly relaxed and at home. Standing in the group, she closed her eyes and took a few deep breaths and prayed for the grace to let go of the anger and fear that hung around her like black funeral crepe. This ritual was designed to end that, to turn the dark into light, to banish the hate and the fear and invite the trust and the warmth back. This is a ritual of celebration and cleansing, Myrna was explaining to the gathering. Its roots go back many thousands of years, but its branches reach out and touch us today and embrace anyone who wants to be included. If you have any questions, just ask. Myrna paused, but no one spoke up. She had a few things in a bag, and now she fished into it and brought out a stick. Actually, it looked more like a thick, straight branch, stripped of its bark and whittled to a sharp point at one end. This is a prayer stick. It might look familiar to some of you. She waited and she heard a small laugh. "Isn't that a beaver stick?" Hannah Para asked. "That is exactly what it is," laughed Myrna. She passed it around and the ice was broken. The women who'd been apprehensive, even a little frightened at what they thought might be witchcraft, thawed and realized there was nothing to be afraid of here. I found it by the mill pond last year, and you can see where the beaver gnawed on it. Eager hands reach out to touch the stick and see the teeth marks and see where the beaver had eaten away the end until it was sharp. Clara had gone home briefly to get Lucy, now standing quietly on her leash. When the prayer stick got back to Myrna, she offered it to the golden retriever, for the first time in a week since Jane had died. Clara saw Lucy's tail wag once. She gently took the stick in her teeth and held it there. Her tail gave another tentative wag. Gamache sat on the bench on the green. He'd come to think of it as his bench since that morning when they'd greeted the dawn together. Now he and the bench were in the sunshine, which was a few precious degrees warmer than the shade. Still, his breath was coming out in puffs. As he sat quietly, he watched the women gather, form a line, and with Myrna in front and Clara behind with Lucy, they walked around the green. Myrna lit the knot of Jane's sage, and it started to smoke. As they walked around the green, the procession of women stopped at the four directions, north, south, east, and west. And at each stop, Myrna handed the smoking knot to another woman who would softly wave her hand in front of the sage, encouraging the sweet-smelling smoke to drift toward the homes. Myrna explained this was called smudging. It was cleansing away the bad spirits and making room for the good. Gamache breathed deeply and inhaled the fragrant mix of wood smoke and sage. It was cold and dark now, dead leaves underfoot and overhead, and swirling in the air in between. The women's high spirits had been replaced by restlessness. A shadow crept over the jovial gathering. Even Myrna became subdued, her smiling, friendly face growing watchful. The forest creaked and shivered. The poplar leaves trembled in the wind. Clara wanted to leave. This was not a happy place. Lucy began to growl, a low, long song of warning. Her hackles rose, and she slowly sunk to the ground, her muscles bunched as though ready to spring. "We must form a circle," said Myrna, trying to sound casual, while actually looking around the gathering, trying to figure out who she could outrun if it came to that. Or would she be the straggler? Damn that grounding casserole, anyway. The circle, the tiniest, tightest known to math, was made, the women grasping hands. Myrna picked up the prayer stick from where Lucy had dropped it and thrust it into the ground, deeply. Clara half expected the earth to howl. "I've brought these ribbons." Myrna opened her bag. Piled there were brightly colored ribbons, all intertwined. "We asked you all to bring something that was symbolic of Jane." From her pocket, Myrna brought out a tiny book. She rummaged around in the bag until she found a crimson ribbon. First she tied the book to the ribbon, then she went to the prayer stick and spoke as she tied the ribbon onto it. "This is for you, Jane, to thank you for sharing your love of the written word with me. Bless you." Myrna stood at the prayer stick for a moment, head bowed. Then she walked away, smiling for the first time since coming to this place. One by one, the women took a ribbon, tied an item to it, tied the ribbon to the stick, and spoke a few words. Some were audible, some were not. Some were prayers, some were simple explanations. Hannah tied an old '78 record to the prayer stick. Ruth, a faded photograph. Sarah tied a spoon, and Nellie a shoe. Clara reached up to her head and pulled out a duck barrette. She tied that to a bright yellow ribbon, and the ribbon to the nail-festooned prayer stick. "This is for helping me see more clearly," said Clara. "I love you, Jane." She looked up and spotted the blind hovering above them and in the near distance. Blind, how strange, thought Clara. Blind, but now I see. And Clara had an idea, an inspiration. "Thank you, Jane," she whispered, and she felt those elderly arms come around her for the first time in a week. Before moving off, Clara pulled a bandana out of her pocket and tied it to the stick for Lucy. But she had one more item to add. From her other pocket, she drew a playing card, the Queen of Hearts. Tying it to the prayer stick, Clara thought of Yolanda and the wonderful gift she'd been offered as a child by Jane that she had either rejected or forgotten. Clara stared at the pattern on the Queen of Hearts, mesmerizing it. She knew there was magic, but it wasn't in staying the same, it was in the changes. By the end, the prayer stick was brilliant, with waving and weaving colored ribbons dangling their gifts. The wind caught some of the objects and sent them dancing into the air around the prayer stick, clinking and clanging into one another like a symphony. The women looked around and saw their circle was no longer bound by fear, but was loose and open, and in the center, on the spot Jane Neal had last lived and died, a wealth of objects played and sang the praises of a woman who was much loved.